Alrighty guys, welcome back to another Dead Stick Adventures video. We're here with this gorgeous Cessna 337 Skymaster. Now our last 337 video went really well. So this one I found out was here at Parafield in the Aero Valley Technologies hangar and also the Command Flight Training hangar. And I decided it was a great opportunity to do a walk around video and show you guys around a really cool, unique aircraft. Before the end of the video, I also want to touch on why or why not these might be a great aircraft for you to purchase. Hope you enjoy. So there are a few main variants of the Cessna 337. They started in 1963 with the fixed gear Skymaster, and then in 1965 they enlarged the fuselage and put retractable gear on it and moved to the Super Skymaster. So from 1965 through to 1973, they had a mechanically driven hydraulic pumps to control the undercarriage. But after 1973, they moved to the more common in the Cessna fleet, the more common electrically driven power packs, which are a lot more popular. Later on, even pressurized models came about, and you had the P337, and then further on, they even got developed into a turbine variant. By the end of the Skymaster's production run, Cessna had built more than 2,990 of the models, including 500 of the military O2 variants. What we've got here is X-Ray Tango Alpha, a 1974 337G. Really nice aircraft, and it's got the electrically driven hydraulic power pack. So as I said, this is X-Ray Tango Alpha, a Cessna 337G model, 1974. It's owned by the Steer Group over in Port Lincoln, and it spends the majority of its time up to 150 miles offshore out over the continental shelf, spotting schools of tuna for the boats to then go and pick up. Up front and also in the back, they're powered by a Continental IO360 engine, so just a 6-cylinder injected Continental engine. They spin the normal American way, which is clockwise when viewed from the pilot seat, mated to a 2-blader fully feathering prop. All right, and they're good for a, 210 horsepower, both engines, at 2,800 RPM. So you've got a combined 420 horsepower there. Down underneath, to control the cooling on both engines, you'll have sets of electrically operated cowl flaps, which are activated by toggle switches in the cockpit itself. Up front here, we've got the nose wheel assembly, and it's quite a complex system because the nose wheel actually comes up and rotates 90 degrees before being stowed. And then a series of micro switches will send a message to these electrically actuated gear doors, and they'll then close on it to seal it shut. So if the cowlings were still on it, up front here on the left is where you check the oil, just through a little flap. And then like most Continental engines, it's got a separate filler nozzle, which is through the top here. That's where you top it up with oil. Inside here, just behind the firewall, is where you'll find the electric power pack, which sends hydraulic fluid to and from the gear. Moving back a little bit, you'll notice they don't have a second door on them like a lot of Cessnas. They've only got the right-hand air stairs door. All right, it's got the typical Cessna strut on it, but unlike a lot of Cessna struts that are aluminium, hollow, and actually structural, this one's got a plastic or a fiberglass sort of fairing around the outside of the strut itself. So moving further back, you've got the twin boom tail on, all right, and that's to make room for that giant propeller that's powered off the rear engine. What you've got with the boom here is in the front forward section of them is a sump tank, all right, and further back, the flaps are actually split. They come down either side of the boom here. Moving back, you can see the propeller there. All right, and because we've got the twin boom tail, it necessitates the need for having 2 rudders. All right, we've also got this gigantic horizontal stabilizer here and quite a large elevator too. Now it means that the cabling is fairly complex. All right, we've got rudder cables going down both booms. All right, we've got an elevator cable going down one boom and a trim cable going down the other one. So they're fairly complex in terms of control cables. So that could also add to the maintenance if you were thinking about purchasing one. Due to the fact the rear engine's the pusher, all this accelerated airflow goes straight over the horizontal stabilizer and hence the elevator, making the elevator really effective when the rear engine's producing thrust. All right, it can cause quite a big pitch change too. So what Cessna installed was a bit of a safety system. It's an auto trim mechanism. That means if you retract the flap while you've got full rearward trim, it'll actually automatically cycle the trim forward for you. So you actually need an electric trim in these aircraft for that reason. It also limits the trim travel when you're in the flapless configuration. You can't go down past a certain point. One thing to watch out for on these is, unlike a typical Cessna where you'll have a tail tie down, so if you accidentally get a bit vigorous on the landing and you do strike the tail, you're only going to really touch that metal ring against the runway. On the 337 though, and remember I said they do have a really effective elevator, so it is easy to get them in a tail low position, but watch out for it because they've only got a piece of fiberglass fairing here stopping the tail from hitting the runway. And you can see this one's actually had a tail strike before. Whether it was a rock that flew up off the main gear, blown up from the prop, or whether they actually struck the tail, I'm not sure, but something to definitely watch out for. So the rear engine is the cool one, all right? It's the pusher. It actually powers air backwards in order to push the aircraft forwards, the opposite of the front tractor engine. And you can tell, if you look at the propeller, it's twisted in a different way to the one at the front. Now, something the engineers had to overcome when they're building a pusher engine is the fact that the forces on that thrust bearing are different to your typical, like the front engine, where the propeller is actually forcing and trying to separate, creating a tension force, trying to separate the propeller from the engine. On the back one, it's the opposite. All right, this propeller is trying to push itself into the engine. So it requires you can't just take a regular engine and dump it at the back. There has to be a little bit more thought involved because of those different compression forces. Something to note about the rear engine is it's actually the critical engine on these 337s because it has the greater adverse effect on performance. If you lose the rear engine, all right, you're gonna be climbing at a lesser rate than if you lost the front engine, making the rear one the critical. So again, with the rear engine, we've got these electrically operated cowl flaps, which are really important as the rear engine does have a bit of a tendency to overheat. So it relies purely upon either relative airflow from flying, or if you're on the ground, it relies on airflow from the front propeller entering into this rear scoop, having the cowl flaps open to cool it. So keep your cowl flaps open on the ground. Other thing to note, it's got your typical oil dipstick here on the right, but if you want to put oil in the rear engine, you are going to need a step, because you've got to get up all the way up here, all right, to actually be able to get to the oil filler for the rear engine. Another thing to watch, guys, as well, if you're taxiing over like uneven or rocky terrain, is that the wheels can spray rocks or any other debris up into this rear propeller and damage it. So yeah, be really careful there. You can either taxi on the front or just the rear engine, or you can just keep one at a lower RPM instead of the other. The good thing is though that the rear prop does have a lot more clearance than the front. Now I've opened up the gear doors here so we can have a look at this rear undercarriage system. You can see it's fairly complex. You've got 4 doors, so you've got the front door here for the actual gear leg itself, and then the wheel itself tucks up in here. Similar to the 210s and the 172RGs and the like, the main gear swivels up into position here. But the danger with these is that how draggy these rear clamshell doors are. If you get caught in an engine failure situation and these gear doors don't close, particularly if you've only got, say in the earlier models where you've only got the one gear pump to get them closed, and that happens to be on the engine that's failed, you could be in a situation where the doors are open, you've lost an engine, and now you're going to suffer the drag penalty, which is huge, of having these massive big parachutes out the back here. So that's why it's better to have the redundancy of a second pump, or the electrical system where it's not going to lose out if you suffer a engine failure. One thing you can do to fix that adverse effect on your performance is to completely get rid of the gear doors itself, these big clamshell ones. RT Aerospace in Florida has a really cool STC, similar to what you see in a lot of 210s, that actually removes the clamshell doors entirely and the front gear doors, all right, in order to just have a channel for the gear to retract up into. Gets rid of 2 doors, 2 actuators, and 4 hydraulic hoses. The benefits are you end up with faster retraction and extension times, faster gear cycles, all right? You don't have the asymmetric danger if you have the doors fail to an open position. No adverse effect on performance in terms of climb or cruise speed, and you're going to save on both maintenance and weight. So in 1973, as well as upgrading the undercarriage system in the aircraft, Cessna also did away with the side hinge normal door like you'd see on a 172, and they went instead for this clamshell style air stair door. All right, so you push the top one up and you can step on the bottom one to get in. Now, the cool thing is when you're taxiing around in summer, you get heaps more airflow and it feels awesome. Inside the cockpit, they're reasonably roomy and spacious. And the cool thing is, similar to like an Aerostar fuselage, is they're almost the same width all the way from the front to the back, meaning you've got similar shoulder width whether you're in the front row or the rear. The one thing your passengers will miss though is any baggage space. She's not going to be able to put it anywhere, it'll have to go on their laps. The other thing you'll find, especially if you're in the rear row, the aft row of the aircraft, is they are fairly noisy. I mean, you've got to think, the reason is that rear engine's only a couple inches from the back of my head, so they're going to be a little bit noisier than your typical wing-mounted twin. I said this aircraft was used for long stints, sometimes up to 9 or 10 hours out over the ocean, and you can see the aircraft's well equipped for it. Got a life raft here, a couple of life jackets, and the necessities. These aircraft, as a lot of you know, were used in Vietnam as an observation plane, all right, and these days used in South Australia, at least, for tuna spotting. So one of the reasons they're so popular as an observation plane is that if you look to the left from the pilot seat, and this pilot seat is slid back, normally you'd be up about here, but we're actually forward of the leading edge of the wing. Now, as you'll know, if you've ever flown a Cessna before, typically when you bank, the wing blocks your view. But in these aircraft, it doesn't. From the front seat, you can see straight out to the horizon, even in a steep bank, which is really cool. So up front, they're just like any other Cessna cockpit, all right? Control quadrant here in the middle, all right? Regular Cessna flap lever, okay? And then as we move up, we've got the engine gauges, and they're a little bit different to what you'll see in most aircraft. They're designed to be easily comparable left to the right, rear to front engine, all right? And as you'll learn, if you do ever fly one, the only way to tell if you have an engine failure is not from the yaw, because there is no yaw, all right? Tiny bit of roll from the torque differential, but there is no yaw. And what you've got to use instead is the gauges. And big tip for you, do not use the manifold pressure gauge. See if you can figure out why. But always use the RPM, and the fuel flow gauge is a pretty good indicator too. On the left, we've got our car flap selector switches here, trim, gear selector, and a regular 6-pack in the front. Now, this aircraft is undergoing an avionics install at the moment, hence why there's wires and missing sections out of the dash. They're just doing an ADS-B update for the aircraft and putting a new ADS-B transponder in it. So with the control quadrant, everything's based on left front, right rear. Okay, so that's the way they do it. So there's no left, right in this aircraft, as I often get wrong because I'm used to flying wing-mounted aircraft. Left is front, right is rear, and that's the methodology they've gone from for the whole aircraft, including the fuel selectors up here. So as you can see, all right, we've got the rear engine here, okay? Rear to right goes to the main tank, okay? And left is the front, and that goes to the main tank if it's on the left, okay? You can cross-feed with fuel from the opposite tank, all right, and you've also in this aircraft you've got auxiliary tip tanks as well, which is why it's got the extended wings on it, all right, giving it up to I think 9.5 hours endurance. They take them out over the ocean, they throttle them back to about 45% power, and they can chug around like that for a long time, burning very little fuel. All right, so there you have it. There's a walk around of one of my favorite aircraft, the Cessna Skymaster 337. I could talk about these aircraft for hours, but I just wanted to give you guys a quick insight, you know, a 20-minute walk around to show you around what a fantastic aircraft these are and show you all the bits and pieces there are that not a lot of people understand. Something cool that I really wanted to touch on is that a company based out of California in the US is building a hybrid 337. They've got a post-73 model, they've put an electric motor in the front, and they've kept the original piston engine in the back, which is really cool. The reason they did that is because of the push-pull configuration, that centerline thrust. You can have quite a large thrust differential between the two engines and put a much more powerful engine in the front and a weaker one in the back, and it's not going to cause any adverse handling characteristics. So if you want to check that out, I'll link it below, but it's a really cool project. There are a few points to consider if you're thinking about purchasing a 337, and those are, number one, the 73 onwards models like this one had the electrical power pack to control the hydraulics, as opposed to the earlier ones which had the engine-driven hydraulic motors. The pre-1973 models are still really great aircraft, but you really want to pick one up that's got the secondary hydraulic pump installed in the rear engine for that added redundancy. You don't want to get caught with the gear half up or those clamshell doors open in the middle of an engine failure, particularly after takeoff. So number two, they're not that great as a 6-seater aircraft because you don't have any baggage storage. Your passengers are going to be having to hold their bags on their laps. Number three, They are potentially safer in an engine failure, all right? You don't have the asymmetric yaw if you lose an engine, but I say potentially because it's still incredibly important to get a qualified instructor to teach you how to fly one of these, particularly in an emergency. Number 4, the maintenance on the undercarriage system could be more compared to like your similar Seneca or your Baron, particularly if it's not being well maintained. But I did talk about that mod that is available, and that can mitigate a lot of the costs. It's really important to find an engineer that knows these aircraft to work on. Number 5, the purchase price for one of these aircraft is typically lower than your comparative Seneca or Baron, which is a really great thing. Particularly in Australia, you can pick one up for a pretty decent price, around 70 to 100 grand for a decent one. Overall, you won't find a more unique aircraft for the price. You'll turn a lot of heads on the ramp, and you'll find a lot of people are envious of your awesome push-pull Cessna. Don't listen to the people that refer to them as mixed masters, they're just jealous. We're going to be doing more videos on the 337s in the future, so if you like this one, leave us a subscribe and a like, and definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook for more updates, all right? We'll see you next time.